I didn't even think to myself that I had an eating disorder, even though in school, when working with athletes, and it really wasn't until I had finally had him bring something up and that maybe I should go see a doctor. And, I started that recovery process. I think it can feel really scary for people. And when they hear like intuitive eating or intuitive movement, there's a pushback. Having more of that focus on function can really provide that longevity. Instead of focusing so much on how my body looks, I'm more focused on how it feels and on my overall health. You can be really great at your job and not have this quote unquote ideal body that society sees as ideal and that it's always shifting. Like I was kind of just a shell, and it was all about how my body looked and how I was eating and how I was exercising and performing. That
Mm.
was all that I felt like identified me.
All right, welcome back, Wellness Ninjas, to another episode of the Wellness Dojo Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Craig, and I'm excited today to have our special guest, Nikole Squires. She is the CEO of Intuitive Movement, inspired by her personal journey developing, recovering, and healing from an eating disorder, and now very passionate about helping other people with those similar concerns and issues. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here, Nikole.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. This is a topic I know we talked before, and there's so much that we can cover in today's episode. So I'm gonna try and like hone it in and keep us on one path here. But can you talk just a little bit about intuitive movement and just kind of how you got into this field that you're in right now?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, I have a little side business called Intuitive Movement, and that really came from my own healing and unfortunately development of, but then, subsequent healing and recovery from an eating disorder. Um, my background is in athletic training, and I was working as the head athletic trainer for a collegiate men's lacrosse team during my recovery. And what I saw was very surprising. I obviously had my recovery lens on, but I just noticed a lot of body image issues. I noticed a lot of the players going extra to the gym because they felt pressure for their bodies to look a certain way in order for them to perform a certain way. They had this idea of a connection of how their body looked would be how their body would perform. And I just realized also in my schooling, working with other athletes, that this was a common issue. And I had personally dealt with compulsive exercise myself in my own eating disorder. And so I wanted to help people to know like what quote unquote healthy or, flexible exercise and movement looks like. And so that's kind of where intuitive movement came from, was me just really wanting to help people recover from their disordered eating and exercise in a way that worked for them, where they could still do their sport, or they could move in ways that they enjoyed, um, but actually do it for the enjoyment of it rather than some of the disordered reasons, like feeling like they have to make up for what they ate or that their body had to look a certain way to perform a certain way.
Mm. Yeah, and you mentioned like compulsive exercising. Like what for the audience that's listening and watching, can you describe that a little bit on like what that is?
Yeah, so compulsive exercise isn't in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Disorders, but it is up. It's become increasingly an issue, um, where it's being recognized by a lot of therapists who work with people who have eating disorders. So essentially, compulsive exercise is exercise that significantly interferes with someone's life, and it occurs at inappropriate times, settings, or when the individual continues to exercise despite injury, medical complications, energy levels, social settings. So it's a very like excessive, rigid exercise regimen, despite, weather, fatigue, illness, um, a lot of anxiety and discomfort with rest, using exercise to manage emotions or as a means of purging, such as a way to quote unquote burn off or get rid of calories. Also using exercise as permission to eat, or as a way to punish or make up for something you ate. And it can turn to feeling like you're never going hard enough, fast enough, pushing hard enough, and can lead to social isolation and withdrawal.
Yeah. And that's such a common thing, right? Is people who are like, well, I'll just work extra hard at the gym tomorrow and, I'll eat this thing. And we kind of brush it off and kind of joke about it a little bit. But I know even just from listening to you there and from talking to other people about eating disorders and these types of things, the real common denominator here when it comes to like, when is it just like, yeah, I'm just kind of like making a joke about it to like when is it a
Hmm.
real concern? It sounds like it's when it is actually starting to impact your daily life and it's you're starting to create anxieties and stresses around social settings and just living your life the way that you want to live it versus like feeling like I have to get to the gym because now I'm panicked about this.
Yeah, exactly. There's like an anxiety component to it for sure. And this feeling of like, I must do it rather than this is a thing that I get to do and that I enjoy doing.
Mm. If you don't mind me asking, like, when did you first realize that was something for you, where like your daily life was actually now being impacted in a negative way because of this?
Yeah, and if it's helpful, I can go a little further back than that, if
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
okay.
please do. Yeah.
Yeah, because it was so gradual for me, and I think that that's really important for a lot of people who may be coming to realizations
Mm,
slowly over time that maybe their relationship with food and exercise, they thought they were quote unquote healthy, and it has taken a dark turn. Um, so what happened, it was such a slow slide. And some people can, you know, engage in some of these things and it doesn't end up being compulsive or disordered, but for other people it does, and you don't know if you're that person or not. That's what's hard. We still don't know exactly what it is about people where they can engage in these health related behaviors and they end up engaging in disordered eating and exercise, eventually, having like an exercise or eating disorder. And then people who they engage and then they're like, okay, that didn't work for me, and then they move on. Okay, so anyway, I digress. So what happened for me is I I served at like a church mission, and on that church mission, I decided to cut out desserts. And it was so small, and I did it to help someone that I was working with was trying to quit smoking, and so he saw it as a pleasure. So I was like, "Oh, I see this as a pleasure. I'll cut this out." So it started pretty innocently, but what happened is I felt more in control, and I started to feel like this rigidity take over some of the ways I was eating, and it started to shift into exercise during that time too. So I felt like I needed to become more rigid around how I exercised, and I couldn't skip a day. And I remember sometimes being very sick and still going outside in the morning and going for a run. So when I came home from that church mission, um, I also felt like really destabilized because going from like serving people all the time to now I have to think about school, that can feel very anxiety provoking. And so I realized too that when I controlled the way I exercised and ate in certain ways, that I could quote unquote control the anxiety would go down. Or I could at least, hide the anxiety with, being so fatigued and tired that I didn't have space to feel it. Um, so what happened is over those 2 to 3 years, I started to become more and more restrictive and rigid with how I was eating and how I was exercising. And then in the summer of 2015, I was 21 at the time, I dove into what ended up becoming anorexia nervosa with binge and purge behaviors. So, really severe restriction. And then the main purging mechanism I had would be exercise. So, I would exercise for a really long time and I would eat very little. Um, and so, a lot of this movement that I was doing, like I grew up running with my dad, and it was like such a positive memory. And I did cross country and track in high school. And like I have very positive memories with, a lot of things like that. And weightlifting, felt like I was helping to prevent injury, by weightlifting while I was running. But it shifted from something I enjoyed doing to something I felt like I had to do. Um, and it's funny because I started it feeling like, oh, this is helping me feel more in control. But by the time I got help, I felt like it was totally controlling me. Like I had no control over it. So I think what really happened, where I started to get signs is, my husband and I, we would go snowboarding and skiing on the weekends. And I had been engaging in these behaviors for about 3 years at this point. And as I was I was exercising so much, but I was feeling very frustrated because I was not performing well. And what I mean by that is I would go for these really long runs, but like I wouldn't be getting any faster or I wouldn't feel great at the end. Or when we would go snowboarding and skiing, I wouldn't be able to keep up with my husband. And I was thinking, well, I'm doing so much more exercise than him. Like, why am I struggling to keep up with him? And I really could only do like a half day of skiing because I would just feel so exhausted um, at the end of it. And I had a lot of shin problems. I started experiencing like stress fracture type issues. Um, And I started realizing that I was engaging in exercise even when I didn't want to, and I was starting to be socially isolated.
Mm.
So, and I also wouldn't engage in like lower intensity exercise. So, for example, if someone said that they wanted to go for a walk with me, I didn't want to do that because it wasn't quote unquote hard enough.
Wasn't worth it.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So that was a really, really long answer, but it's been a long progression. And then I started just noticing some of these things where it started to get harder and harder to say like, oh, I'm just a quote unquote health nut, where I
Mm.
was just like, I think this is starting to take over my life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such an interesting thing because like you said, like it really is, I think, difficult for people to pick up on the signs because first of all, we're fed so many different things through society and social media and everything about like what is supposed to be acceptable is like funny thing is even as you're talking, I'm thinking like, yeah, under this sweater, I'm wearing a shirt that says no excuses on it, right? And like even that
Hmm.
alone has gives off this perception of like what it's supposed to mean to, should I have excuses? Should I not have excuses? Like, how rigid should I be? And what does that mean about me as a person? Right. And it really
Hmm.
sounded as you were describing that as like your identity almost was morphing as you kind of increase the rigidness of your program and stuff like that. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. By the time I went into recovery, I felt like I had nothing else. Like I was kind of just a shell, and it was all about how my body looked and how I was eating and how I was exercising and performing. That
Mm,
was all that I felt like identified me.
yeah. And like at what point did you go like, okay, something is like super misaligned here. Like I really am not happy with this and I need to make a change.
You know, I think I stayed in denial for a really long time, um, because I was very full on engaging in these behaviors for 3 years and then slowly engaging in them for years and years before. But it actually was my husband. So when we had met, I was already engaging in those behaviors, and I was very good at hiding them, which can create also a lot of shame, right?
Mm.
So I was very good at hiding them because I think deep down I knew that some of the things that I was doing probably wasn't helpful long term for me. Um, but it started to feel like I needed to do them in order to like not have any anxiety or not feel like I was going to have a panic attack, things like that, using it, exercise and the way I ate to control that. Um, that it was just so hard to want to let go of. And I got more and more socially isolated, and I really was not a very good wife. And my husband sat me down one day, and he's the person who I think just helped me realize that something was wrong. So um he just said like, "Hey, I mean, if I were to go back," and he did his very best. He had no idea what was going on. He used a lot of you statements, which made me feel very defensive.
Mhm.
But I think he was just trying to get it across. And what I recommend for anyone if you're worried is to try to use I statements like, "Hey, I'm worried about you." But instead he said things like, "Hey, I've noticed that you never want to spend time with me. You never want to go to family functions. Like I noticed that you're starting to have like a lot of these symptoms, like you're always sick and you never like want to take a break and you are like I was starting to miss classes and my clinical rotations at this point.
Mm.
Um, with the exercise component and also just feeling so fatigued and tired all the time. Um, and so he just brought up a lot of these things that he'd been seeing that I had also been seeing, but playing off as like, oh, it's fine, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And I ended up breaking down crying because I think him bringing it up, I hadn't had anyone like say out loud some of the things that I was doing. And I had realized like, wow, I feel I did this to feel more in control and I feel so out of control. And I feel like I like don't know who I am anymore, that this is just my entire life.
Yeah, like I mean, it's so tough anytime like we know that our identity has been kind of shifting and changing, and even probably intuitively we kind of know that it's like misaligned. It's like when somebody else sees it, especially somebody who, who you love so much and somebody who's so close to you, it's almost like your identity now is being like called into question. And like
Hmm.
it's like a super scary thing, and it makes sense that you'd be super defensive about that initially too, right? You're like, "Whoa, this is just like who I am," is what I imagine
Hmm.
the initial response would be, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because there was that initial defensiveness, but the walls came down pretty quick because obviously it came from someone who really cared. And I really cared too about that, my husband, and I still care in the present tense about my husband. Um, and I think, it was so interesting too because um it really I didn't even think to myself that I had an eating disorder, even though in school when working with athletes, like I had seen that. And it really wasn't until I had finally had him bring something up and that maybe I should go see a doctor. And, I started that recovery process that I just started seeing it everywhere. But it's so funny how you can have those blind spots when it
Yeah.
comes to yourself.
Yeah, this speaks to the importance of having somebody in your life who is willing to gently nudge you and kind of try and bring shed some light on some of these things for you, right? It really does create a
Mhm.
big impact.
Yeah, having people in your corner is very important.
Yeah. So, one more question I want to ask you just around kind of your personal journey with that is was was a lot of it just based on like body image, on like how you wanted to look, or was it more, I know you said it started with kind of like trying to help somebody else and support somebody else with something that they were trying to do. I'm curious if like body dysphoria um, did that play into it? And at what point did that start to take over?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's so interesting because when I started recovery, I would have said no, that didn't play into it. But the more I got into recovery, the more it was like, peeling an onion, the layers back. It went deeper and deeper and deeper. And so there's a lot of like really, really deep stuff we could get into. For like brevity's sake, I'll keep it a little bit more surface level. Um, I think what happened is so with anorexia, a part of the diagnosis is there are body image disturbances. So I did have a lot of body dysmorphia, and um, I just viewed my body. I don't think I could see it, and honestly, I still don't think I can see it the way that other people see my body. And for me, now I've been able to shift to, instead of focusing so much on how my body looks, I'm more focused on how it feels and on my overall health, and that helps to keep, me in recovery so that I don't backslide. But I think, it's interesting with like the body dysmorphia piece. And we had talked about this in our initial chat a few weeks ago. There's this idea when you're working in the athletics, personal training, strength and conditioning, there's this quote of like, quote unquote, my body is my business card.
Mhm.
And I felt a lot of that pressure, but I also don't like that sentiment within the field, because people can have amazing knowledge and be so great at what they do, no matter their, body shape or size. I think about, for example, with engineers, if they don't fit a lot of stereotypes of like, being an engineer, like let's say they like love, this is terrible with, we can cut this out after you want to, but like some stereotypes with engineering, for example, is like kind of nerdy, right? But let's say it's someone who's like a little bit more like punk rocky, they're a skater, all of that stuff, but they're an amazing engineer, right? They don't have to fit the stereotypes to be great
Yes.
at their job. And I think it's similar as well with in the fitness realm and in like the personal training, strength and conditioning, athletic training. You can be really great at your job and not have this quote unquote ideal body that society sees as ideal, and that it's always shifting.
Yeah. And no, I think that's a great analogy. And like the thing that pops in my mind too is you see somebody who's maybe like super looks really rough around the edges, looks like, you start to make all these initial assumptions and judgments in your head, and then you find out that they're like super religious and, like all these types of things. It's like so not what you expected from that person. And yeah, it is something that in this health and wellness industry as a whole, it's really it's really tricky to navigate that as an individual who's trying to inspire other people, but also trying to stay true to yourself. Like it's a whirlwind. It really is. So I can empathize with that for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, since we've kind of like veered into that, can I ask you some questions about your own experience?
Yes, let's go. Let's go.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I'm curious, with like you working in this industry, how would you describe like your relationship with your body over the years?
Um, like when I started as a like I started in the industry, massage therapy first and personal training kind of like really closely after that. And
Mm,
I've always been a smaller guy. Like I've never been like super jacked or like I've never had that. I've always been athletic, but I've never had that stereotypical athletic build. Like I've always been funny, kind of, for lack of a better term.
mm,
And so yeah, like I hated my body when I first started, and my body is my resume. Like that was 100% where my mind was at when I started. And so I would like work my ass off to try and get bigger. I was like eating like to this day, chicken like doesn't sit well in my stomach because I eat so much chicken trying to put on muscle and stuff like that. Like
mm.
just like little things like that But yeah, that was my relationship with my body, was like I hated it. I was never happy with it. I was always trying to change it whatever I could do to look like this person or that person. And like the relationship with my body became my relationship with myself, where then you're
Mm,
like, I don't have confidence that my body is giving off the image that other people need. So then all of a sudden now, like, I don't have confidence in my relationships. I don't have
mm,
confidence in performing in my business and actually trying to attain clients and those types of things. Like it really did. It's like this like spiral snowball kind of effect that takes place. So it was rough for a while. Yeah.
I'm so sorry about that. That sounds extremely challenging.
Yeah, and it's funny because kind of like what you said, like it was, but at the same time, like at the time, it didn't feel like it was. Like it didn't
Mm,
feel like I was struggling. It just like
yeah.
for me, I was like, yeah, this motivates me. I'm like grinding and pushing and stuff. Like it actually felt good in the moment until
Hmm.
you get to a place where it doesn't feel good anymore, and you kind of have
Yeah.
like that kind of awakening, like you described. Right?
Yeah, totally. I love what you shared too. I mean, I really don't like that you had to go through that. I'm so sorry, but I think that what you shared is such a good example of like how common it is to that, body image issues are not just like a female thing. And
Mm.
I feel like that's really common, like a common myth is
Yeah.
that, people who struggle with eating or exercise or body image are like wealthy or middle class white females. And that's not the case at all. It can be any gender, any ethnicity or race, any socioeconomic status. Anyone can struggle, and especially in the health and wellness and fitness realms, it's the risk of eating disorders and disordered exercise is higher. Um, so yeah, I was just thinking about what you shared too with feeling like you had to be bigger.
Mhm.
That's so common for men in this industry too. So I just looked this up with a seven. Are you okay if I share some research?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm getting my PhD right now, so I'm all in the research right now.
I love
So
it.
there's a 7-year longitudinal study by Nagata et al. From 2019. And it was really interesting because what they found is that 22% of men in this study, where I think they looked at over 11,000 individuals, so 22% of men, which is about 1 in 5, and 5% of women, so about 1 in 20, were found to engage in like muscularity oriented disordered eating and exercise behaviors.
Mm.
So yeah, it's like it's so common, but it's not talked a lot about in the community because I think, like you said, when you're in it, it doesn't seem like there's any issues
Yeah.
until there are. You start to
Yeah.
recognize.
Yeah, and like you're trying to hide behind it too, right? Because like for me, when I was in that position, and maybe you felt this way as well, being somebody who's kind of in that world, but it's like you don't want to tell people you're feeling that way because then that just
Mhm.
highlights it even more. You're like, I don't want to
Yeah.
tell people that like I don't like my body because then it just highlights my body more to those people. And then it's like even more risky that they're gonna be like, oh yeah, he is like a really small guy. Like he probably doesn't know much about building
Mm,
muscle and like those types of things. But then I would also see it in other people and I would hear other client like I would hear people in the gym that would say like I wouldn't work with her because she looks like she's overweight. So like clearly she doesn't know like kind of what to do to help me lose weight. And in my mind now today, I look at that and I go, man, how wrong were they? Because she might have been the best person that could relate to you. And, for somebody else who's trying to build muscle, who's maybe struggling with that, like I might also be like one of the best people to help them with that because I've been through that struggle. Like I know that struggle. I can help you through that struggle. And it's kind of like all of our kind of our failures, our downfalls, and our struggles in life, like those set us up to be able to help people better. right? Whereas I always
Mm-hmm.
viewed it when I was in it as like, once I'm big enough, like once I put on some muscle, then
Yeah.
I'll be able to convince people that I can help them. Then people will start to hire me more. Then this and this, yeah, this thing that you're chasing that you're never gonna reach because it's mental, it's not physical, right?
Yeah, totally. And I wonder if I could ask you a question about that too.
Mm.
Something you said there, like you're never going to reach it because it's mental. That's like the whole thing with body image, right? So I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, was there ever a point in you trying to change your body that you ever did feel satisfied, or did it always just feel like unreachable?
Um, I think it always kind of felt like unreachable. Like it's funny because like I bulked so hard at one point and then I got really big and then I was like pretty happy with that and then I cut weight and then I was like, okay, like this is like the best shape that I've ever been in and I was pretty happy with it. But then when I look back at photos of when I bulked, like I put on like so much fat while I was bulking as well. It's like then when I looked back at that, I was like, oh, like I still don't like the way that that looked. So like even when I
Mm,
had reached that point that was I was satisfied, I was finally big, I was finally like as strong as, not as strong as I wanted to be, but I finally felt like I was stronger and I was, maybe like getting there. When I look back now, I look at it, I'm like, man, that's like I'm not satisfied even with what that was now, but in a different
yeah.
light of that. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was only like really recently in my life that I started to be able to tap into what feels good instead, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, like working out because it feels good, working out because it makes my body feel better. But like I had to get to a really uh painful state emotionally and physically to like finally realize like, hey, I don't care how I look anyway. Like that's gonna be a side effect, maybe. I just want to get to a point
Yeah.
where like this doesn't hurt anymore and this feels better and I can move better and feel energized and those types of things. And then once you do that, it just becomes so much easier to get the results that you've like always wanted, quote unquote. Right.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like you said, it's when you focus so much on, I call it like function over form. So when you
Mm.
focus so much on the form piece, and what I mean by form is literally like the shape of your
Yeah, shape
body.
and weight, right?
Yeah, that can really hinder ability and create a lot of dysfunction, like you said, and that misalignment. But when we focus more on that function, so how we feel, being able to do the things that we enjoy, then, whatever happens with shape and weight is like a side, and we can kind of put it on the back burner,
Yeah.
and focus more on, and that's also, it leads to like longevity too, with, if you really want to create a behavior change, you like want to be more regularly engaged in movement, or you want to, do X, Y, and Z, having more of that focus on function can really provide that longevity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like trying to change the ideas of what we've been telling ourselves or what we've been told is like what we should
Mm,
do as well. Like for me, when I
yeah.
started to finally like start to feel better, it was because I kind of cut down this idea in my mind that like I have to do weights. Like if I'm gonna work out, it has to be weights because I have to build muscle.
Mm,
Like I try
yeah.
to, I really changed that. I'm like, I don't have to do weights. I'm just going to make sure that I'm doing something and that it feels good. So like if I'm feeling like if my hips and my back are feeling tight today, I'm not gonna do my squats. I'm gonna do something different. But like
Mm,
that idea, going back to kind of something you
yeah.
said earlier, is like that idea that it still counts. Like it still counts
Yeah.
towards something because the overall why, the overall purpose of why I'm actually exercising is actually like staying in the light, not just like it's like I have to go for a run because I've always ran, right? And because
Yeah.
that's always
Yeah.
how I was taught to exercise. Like, well, there's other ways that we can exercise too, and maybe it feels better for today, and then that actually becomes more sustainable because it felt better today.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that sustainability piece. And you're totally right. Starting to shift the way that we see things, for to I have to do this because I've always done it too. Like you said, just being a bit more mindful and checking in. Like, is this something I want to do? Is this something that will be okay for my body? Because our bodies change from day to day. Like you said, right? Some days you might feel really, really tight. So, is it really smart to do something that might, for example, create an injury if you're extremely tight, right? Or is that, your body letting you know, hey, let's do something a little different today?
Yeah. Yeah, and I imagine that's where this idea of like intuitiveness comes in, right? Is like
Hmm.
really just like paying attention to like the signals that your body's giving you and
Yeah.
not always pushing them aside and saying like, no, I don't care that my
Yeah.
knee's hurting me today. Like I'm getting this run in because it's important to me. Like maybe there's a time and a place for that, right? But it's like that
Mhm.
intuitiveness is like really listening to that, I would think. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would totally agree. And when I work with people, I always tell them you have unconditional permission to rest.
Mm,
And what that means is you can go into, so for example, if you're wanting to become more regular with, let's say, running, because we've been using that for the past couple of examples,
yeah.
um, and you're thinking, okay, I want to run, like let's say like 3 times a week, and your third run of the week comes up and you're feeling so fatigued and gassed. So you have unconditional permission to rest. And what that means is you are welcome to choose whatever you want to do. You are in charge. And what this will lead people to do is sometimes the fatigue comes from really their body saying, I need a rest. And other times it comes from, it was a long week and maybe the run will help. And so what I always invite people to do is give yourself space to rest and also give yourself space to try it with the permission to rest.
Mm,
So, for example, put on your running shoes, see how that feels. Start walking out the door, see how that feels. Set a timer for 1 minute and start jogging, see how that feels. If by that time you still feel like this is terrible, like I really don't want to do this, you don't have to do that. But just giving yourself the permission and the ability to experiment and be curious too, and to get to know, because sometimes when we feel fatigued, we need rest. And sometimes when we feel kind of like that groggy, tired feeling, exercise can really help and help us to feel invigorated. And it's
yeah.
different from person to person. So being curious. And obviously, if I'm working with someone who struggles with compulsive exercise, I'm working very closely with their therapist and dietitian and doctor
Yeah.
so that, I'm not recommending anything that is counter their recovery.
Yeah.
But it can help people to reframe too and realize, I went in, I did all of this stuff. I really hate this. And to give themselves permission, okay, you can stop. You don't have
Yeah.
to keep going. What else would feel good,
Yeah.
if
I,
anything?
I love this way that you've put that because it takes this idea of like intuitiveness, which I think a lot of people when they hear that, when people hear like intuitiveness, flexible dieting, flexible exercise, like these types of things, and I myself included, it can even start to feel like you're like, I'm just letting myself off the hook too much, but that's
Mm,
not what it is. It's actually intuitiveness, the way that you describe it, which I love makes it sound like intuitiveness is actually like taking the control back and like allowing
yeah.
yourself the permission to make either choice. Like
Hmm.
if today I decide that I am going to run through this injury or whatever, because that's what feels right for me today, and like and I feel okay doing it, then like I have permission to do that. But also I also have permission to rest today. If I start running and it doesn't feel good, and like I'm like that makes me feel like a little bit worried, and I'm like, I don't know if I should run on this knee today. I also have permission to just walk today, right? And
Hmm.
it's that sounds like a lot more like I'm in control and I'm making these choices, um, versus like I'm doing like because I think people can go the other way too, where they're like, "Oh, I should be kinder to myself. I should be doing this. Like there's no should. There's no like I have to be kinder to myself. No, it's just like giving yourself that permission to adjust, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that like as a society generally, we have a lot of rules around how we quote unquote should or should
Mm,
not be doing things. And so I think it can feel really scary for people. And when they hear like intuitive eating or intuitive movement, there's a pushback because
mm,
there's this idea of if I don't do what I quote unquote should, I will never do anything. But what really happens is when you tap into you are the person, you have autonomy and it's your life and your body and your one beautiful life to live, then it feels very empowering because it's like I get to decide what it is that I want to do. And I am the person that knows that best because I am the only person who lives inside my head, inside my body. And so it's all about like rebuilding trust that our body has our back.
yeah.
Even though often it doesn't feel like it, but our body has our back and it sends us little signals to help us know what to choose. But often we get so wrapped up in what we should be doing that we forget. Um, and we don't remember how to tap in to what our body's letting us know.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you mentioned kind of society and how things are viewed and the shoulds, and I also think that when we even get into the topic of body image, I think there's a lot
Hmm.
of that too, of like people don't know. They're like, should I just love my body for how it is, or should I work to achieve a quote unquote healthier body? Right? And there's this real dynamic, I think, in society right now of like there's this one grand spectrum side over here, and then there's this one other like super polarizing side over here that's like, no, it doesn't matter how, you know, obese or whatever you are, like love your body and stuff like that. But then there's this other side that's like, well, no, because you're not respecting your body because you're not treating it well. And I'm curious your thoughts on kind of like where this, for lack of a better term, where should we fall on that spectrum, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think already know kind of like where I fall. I'm more in the
Yeah.
weight inclusive camp. But I think when people hear like weight inclusive, they tend to think of that like weight doesn't have any impact. And I don't necessarily believe that. I believe weight has impact, but I think I believe in different ways than people on the other side of the spectrum of like you have to be pursuing weight loss. I
Yeah.
think I just think of weight differently. So I do a lot of weight stigma research, and a really, really big reason why people in larger bodies choose to exercise or change their eating behaviors or work on their stress is to change their body, to be in a smaller body. And, it's interesting because I just have been working on reading through these interviews that my colleague did, and I'm helping her with this study on body image and self compassion in men who are actively pursuing weight changes. And the commonality between all of them is they are wanting to make these changes kind of for the reason you said. They dislike their body. They dislike their body, and almost some of them had like a real hatred or self-loathing. And for me, and a big thing came from I have experienced being discriminated against. People have made comments about my body. And so it's coming from a place of I want to reduce like discrimination against me. And I think that weight definitely has an impact in that way because weight is very visible. Like, for example, race or ethnicity can be more visible. It's
Mm.
also one of the things that people can really uh, talk badly and think down upon and talk badly on people in larger bodies because of how they look. And then, I don't blame anyone in a larger body either for wanting to be smaller because the society we live in really dislikes and does not allow for difference in body shape
Yeah.
and size. And there's a lot of stereotypes that go with that. So that's like my initial answer for that. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, no, the thing that keeps coming to my mind as you're saying that is just like the body is one aspect of this. And I've always
Mhm.
been a believer that your body is a reflection of kind of like your values and the purpose that you're working towards in your life. like to a certain degree. And the reason why I bring that up is to not, make somebody who is maybe struggling with how they look or how they feel in their body and stuff like that. I don't say that to make you feel like, you don't have good values or anything like that. But I say that because I think when people can start to focus on that instead of the body, then like the body will do what it's going to do. But it's more a matter of like, are you living in alignment with the core values that you want to be living in alignment with? Right. And so I think when a lot of people struggle, um, I know in times when I've been like really out of shape, where I felt like I just like wasn't in good shape. It's like I just look like I have too much fat on my body and these types of things. When I really think about it, like initially you look in the mirror and you're like, oh, I don't like this, right? But then when you really ask yourself, you're like, okay, but why is it bothering me so much? Right? Because you see some people, they can live and like they're not in great shape and they're not eating well and stuff, and they're like loving life and it doesn't seem to be bothering them. I say doesn't seem to be bothering them. But when I would think about it, I would go, okay, why is this bothering me so much? It's like, well, because my core values in my life are really strong in like being healthy. Like being healthy is one of my core values. Inspiring other people to live a life that's their best life is something that's, in my core values. Like when you start to like piece together what your core values are, if your body is not reflecting your core values, I think that's where a lot of people can like they just blame the body. Oh, I'm so ugly or all these like nasty things that we can say to ourselves when really like what we're upset about is not actually our body. Like it's not our body that we should be upset about, but it's rather just like how do I start to make some changes so that I start to live more in alignment and feel better about just like the me that's inside of my body first.
Hmm.
It's also a long answer. So
Yeah, yeah, I get what you're saying. I feel a little like pushback with that, and I
Mm,
think I think a big reason is because I see when you say your body is a reflection of
yeah,
how you feel on the inside. I don't think we can generalize that to everyone,
for sure,
um,
for sure.
because I think that body diversity has been around for a really long time. Like you see sculptures and paintings of people who are in what we would consider quote unquote larger bodies,
Mhm.
from hundreds even thousands of years ago. So body diversity has been around for a long time,
Yeah.
and I don't think that we can say based on how someone's body looks that they are unhappy or not living according to their values. And I'll share like what I do when I talk with clients. So what I typically will ask clients is I do want to have a values-based approach. And if they say that they want to do something because they value health, I really want to dig into that. Like what is health to you? What does health look like for you? Because I think sometimes we get so fixated on quote unquote physical health to the detriment of other forms of health, that people say they're pursuing, health behaviors, and then they end up with an eating disorder. Or they end up, like you said, still feeling dissatisfied with their bodies and still feeling like they're not enough. And so, what I try to do is when I talk with people about, okay, let's say you value health, then I'll bring in this piece. So if you are doing, let's say you're wanting to eat more fruits and vegetables because you value your health. Let's say you stay consistent for years. You're eating more fruits and vegetables and you've met all of your health goals. Your biomarkers are great. Your A1C is great. You have good mental health. But let's say you still weighed the same and your body looked the same, but all of your actual physical health markers are great. Would you still want to engage in those behaviors that you're talking about?
Mm.
And I think that's a really good question for people to check in with their motivation. Because if, like, yes, if my weight and my body stayed the same, I would still engage in those behaviors. It's probably coming from this deep value of health. Yes, regardless of weight or shape outcomes, I am open to doing these things. And if it's no, then that's a good time to check in because motivation might become from putting a lot of value on weight and shape and external outcomes, regardless of health. So this can be a sign of being motivated by external factors that impact how you're perceived by others, and also, wanting to reduce stigma or wanting to feel better about yourself. But it can often be sheathed in the value of quote unquote health.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm super glad you gave me some pushback on that because I like as you're describing it in that way, like I do think we're very much aligned in our ideologies around that, right? Like when I'm working with somebody who's like, I have to lose 50 pounds, like they're coming in and they're like, I have to lose, and they're like very, very weight focused on like what they have to do. It's like
Hmm.
my number one goal is to get to a place where we say like where we start to understand like why is that so important to you? Like where does that ideology
Yeah.
come from for you?
Hmm.
Because I believe like uh, credit to what you said there too. Like I believe also that we have to get to a place where we take the focus off of the weight and the body that we want. Because the reality is your body is never really going to be what you have this like this image that we've made in our mind of like that's the body that I want. It's like it's almost
Yeah.
never going to end up the same way that you wanted it to. However,
Yeah.
if you can get to the deeper core and like why is losing 50 pounds so important to you? Right? And like
Mm-hmm.
as you go through those exercises, almost always it goes to something that's like so much deeper of like, I just see my parents
Totally.
struggling with chronic disease and like these types of things. And that's something that like I just don't want to end up like that. Is a really common thing that I hear from people. It's like when you can tap into that now, or I just want to feel more confident when I go out and like those types of things. Like when you can start to tap into that, it's like the way your body looks is not going to actually impact that. But when you start moving more, when you feel more confident going up and down the stairs or running around with your kids and you're not out of breath,
Hmm.
you're going to feel more confident regardless of how your body looks. And
Oh
like I don't
yeah,
know,
totally.
I imagine you've experienced this too, but like when it's kind of like when you've been, let's say you work out for like a week, right? And you've been feeling kind of like not great about your body. You work out for a week and then you look in the mirror and like all of a sudden you're like, wow, I feel like I'm looking a lot better, right? But the reality is like within a week, there's no way I look that much better, right? It's just like
Hmm.
I feel better. And so in my mind now, I'm feeling more confident. And so that confidence then starts to kind of like morph this image that I have of myself, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's true. Exercise independently out of anything, that can help improve body image no matter what happens to weight or body shape or
Yeah.
size. It just helps build confidence. It's also skill building, like being able to engage in more exercise, you're building skills, and that feels
Yeah.
good. It builds your confidence.
Yeah. So if like let's imagine I want to be respectful of your time, so I don't want to go too much further here, but I do want to ask you if there is somebody who is struggling, like let's just say that they are struggling with their eating, maybe they do have an eating disorder where let's just say they're overeating. They're in a body that is not conducive to them achieving what they want to achieve in life. Where does somebody like that who's like really not comfortable in their body,
Hmm.
and like and their core values, not just their body, but and their core values. They're like they know they're not living the life that they want to live, and they're not happy in the body that they're in because the things that they want to do, they're not able to do them because of that. Where does somebody like that begin to start to feel comfortable in their own skin so that they can start to take actions to live the life that they want to live?
Yeah, well, like you said, if they're engaging in like disordered eating, I think the first thing would to be to get help for that. And that obviously has its own privilege too, right? Because that takes money and time to
And
do. So I
awareness.
just want to, yep, yeah. So I just want to acknowledge that off the bat. But there's a lot of like low cost and free resources. So the National Eating Disorder Association, or NEDA, and I can send you like a link to them
Sure.
if you would
Great.
like. They have a lot of, they have like an eating disorder screening tool, and they also have basically a space where you can try to find a therapist near you or find resources near you that are low cost. Just in their search bar, you can find it and they have a resource tab. And so I would encourage someone to look at that first because typically what happens is sometimes when we are so concerned about our weight or shape or we're not feeling very healthy too, and we feel like we want to make changes, like you said, we focus so quickly on our body, but it's often so much deeper. And so getting help to, like I shared with my recovery, peeling back the layers
Yeah.
um, is so important because if you really want true healing and truly to feel better, you have to start to get at the root. And so if eating and exercise issues are consistently coming up with, for example, feeling like binge eating, like I chronically feel like I'm out of control and like I feel really ashamed. And that's like such a scary thing to go through too. Um, Being able to see someone and talk about that, I think would definitely be the first thing. And then the second thing is to try to separate weight and shape with the changes that you want to make. Because research over time has shown, so I have like 6 systematic reviews pulled up. Um, and in those reviews over decades, it's between 5 to 20% of people can actually achieve long-term weight loss. That's a very small percentage of people. When you look at health behaviors themselves, though, health behaviors themselves improve physical and mental health regardless of weight or shape changes. So, in this really big longitudinal review with over 12,000 people, they found that in people across the BMI spectrum, which is how we grade quote unquote overweight, obese, healthy, quote unquote normal weight,
Hmm.
um, they found that when they had engaged in different health habits, their risk level for mortality and chronic disease was the same. So, for example, engaging in one habit of not smoking drops risk where it's a lot closer to equal for across the BMI spectrum. When you add another one, for example, drinking alcohol moderately or not at all, then you add another one, eating fruits and vegetables, you add another one um, of engaging in regular activity, the risk level is virtually the same. It's like 1.0, 1.05, 1.08,
Mm.
the risk level. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, and that's not
Yeah.
talked about. But that is so important because this is longitudinal research, and that shows very consistently that uh, basically pursuing health behaviors themselves improve health no matter the weight change. So often when you go into it with this hyper focus of I have to change my body, I have to change my weight, what ends up happening is weight cycling. So going up and down in weight, which that is an independent risk factor for things like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So these things that we are wanting to prevent, if we go into it with this idea of I have to, lose these pounds, like you shared, a lot of clients will come in with, that can actually lead to yo-yoing, which increases risk. So if we can
Yeah.
take that focus off and just focus on what are behaviors that you really want to get into, that you feel capable of, that are financially feasible for you, know that, like you said, your body will respond and you'll lower your risk for chronic disease if that's what you're worried about, no matter what happens with your weight. That was an
Yeah.
extremely long answer.
No,
So,
it's good though. It's a narrative that I think we need to hear more of, which is, if I was to summarize that, it's like no matter what your weight is, the actions that you're taking matter,
yeah,
right? Like, and like you said, when people come in and it's like so weight focused on like, it's basically like if I'm not losing weight, this like nothing is happening. It's like,
yeah,
no, things are happening, right? Let's
yeah,
give credit to the actions because they are creating change within your body, right? And regardless of how quickly your body decides to change for you or whatever, you are creating a positive impact. And we really need to start to get hyper focused on the impact that we're creating that we don't necessarily always see, like the intangible changes that are developing within you. based off of the behaviors that you're taking that, that align with those core values that you're trying to achieve in your life, right?
Yeah, totally. And like you said, that alignment piece, right? So I think I hope that that's like a really big takeaway for people who listen to is if you're ever pursuing something but it doesn't align well, and that can include pursuing like a health related behavior, right?
Mm.
But you're pursuing it from this place of dislike or disdain, that probably like won't be helpful in the long run, like you shared, because ends up just leading to more dissatisfaction and disdain. But when it can come from a place of, I value my health, I value my well-being, I value my family, I value my time, whatever that may be. And like, what are the choices that I can make that can help with that and that are sustainable for me and that won't lead to dysfunction. So that won't lead me to feel obsessive about exercise or food, but that feels good for me. And I think that's what's going to work for people. And that looks different, for every single person.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always said no matter how much physical action that you take for whatever body changes that you want to make, like it will never be sustainable until you've done the work mentally and emotionally as well, right? And I
Yeah.
think you really touched on that as well prior of, if you're not getting beneath the surface, if you're not kind of peeling back those layers, it's going to be
Hmm.
really, really hard for you to ever get to that place that you want to be at because you're just going to continue to yo-yo. Like uh, something that I'm really starting to love this expression is like wherever you go, there you are, right? And
Yep.
it's like you got to do that inside work. That's the thing that's so important because otherwise, no matter
Yeah.
what your body looks like, you're going to continue to struggle with these things. It's going to continue to really like eat away at you and not make you
Yeah.
feel aligned. Alignment comes from within, right? So
Oh yeah, totally. I love that phrase too. Wherever you go, there you are. Because
yeah,
yeah, and
powerful.
we both shared how we've both been in spaces where we've realized that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
went here and I'm still there.
yeah, yeah, and it's like it continues to be a struggle, right? Like it
Mhm.
continues to be something that we have to. I'm speaking for myself. I don't want to speak for you, but like it's a daily thing. Like I still struggle sometimes with like, should I eat this? Should I not eat this? It's like, okay, let's get intuitive here. Let's be mindful here. And like, I don't think it's ever something that goes away. It's part of human nature. But I think when we can shift our perspective a little bit away from everything being so external and shift it
Mhm.
more into the internal, then I think that's something people can really relate to from this for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, Nikole, I really appreciate you taking time and just like really having a super genuine conversation around this topic. It is a tricky topic to navigate, and so I commend you um for working towards that and helping other people navigate that as well. I think it's just the approach that you're taking and the field that you're navigating and working towards. I just think it's super commendable and I appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. You're like such a kind person, Kyle. So I'm happy to chat with you, and I love what you're doing, trying to combine, help people tap into, what's inside.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody
Mhm.
for listening and watching. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Well, another valuable episode here on the Wellness Dojo podcast. Thanks again to Nikole for coming on, sharing some of her journey through her struggles, her recovery, and her healing with her eating disorder, and how people can tap into their intuitiveness to start to create a healthier relationship with food and exercise and their health and wellness. If you enjoyed this episode, please engage with the show. It really helps us to spread these messages. Like, share, comment, take a screenshot if you're listening, share it on social media, and give us a tag. You can find us by searching the Wellness Dojo or the Wellness Dojo Podcast on all platforms. Thanks again. See you soon.